And then the moment that we awaken to our sexuality, we get more energy. Our nervous system heals. We have access to more of our authentic expression. We're not being run by the rules that inhibit us. And that's a powerful being. You know, a person who is connected to their sexuality is a very powerful human.
More important even than the psychedelic experience, individually, we have to reclaim the primacy of direct experience. As people, the real universe is within your reach, always.
Hello, hello. I'm your host, Eric Osborne, and I'm super happy to be here with you. I'm very happy to be sharing this episode with you. Today I'm talking with Dr. Kat Meyer. She is a psychedelic sex therapist, ketamine practitioner or ketamine clinician, and also runs various retreats around sexual health, sexual authenticity, empowerment, sexual empowerment. She's a fucking fireball, y'all. Really good conversation. She doesn't hold back, just tells it like it is. That is my kind of guest. I don't have time to beat around the bush. Let's just get to the point. If you don't like words like cock and pussy, this might not be the episode for you. Aside from that, just hop in here and enjoy it. You're going to love this conversation. Check out her Instagram page, Kat Meyer. What else? That's about it. Just get in there, enjoy this conversation, leave us some feedback. We always love to hear from you, the listener, to know what you're thinking about these shows. All right, I'll see you on the other side of the mushroom. All right, Dr. Kat.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Oh, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. I've been following your work for a while and really appreciate your just upfrontness, honesty, vulnerability, your realness, which I think should be a requirement in a sex therapist. Am I wrong in that?
I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can have sex. There's all kinds of sex therapists on top of that. But I will say the most fun conferences I've ever been to were sex therapist conferences because it brings all kinds of humans. It's great.
I can only imagine. I'm just coming back from the Maine Fungi Fest, and it was more of a psychedelic conference than an actual mushroom conference. And I was at MAPS last year, whenever it was, and so the psychedelic festivals and psychedelic conferences always bring out an amazing array of individuals. And I have actually been really getting interested in kind of the conscious sex community. I mean, I'm very interested in it, but I have not yet engaged. So I wonder if you can kind of just start out sharing what brought you into conscious sexuality.
Yeah. So I was 21 years old when I was reading a Red Book magazine, and at the time I was studying to be an animal psychologist, which is totally like a human animal. But I decided humans were really fascinating. And then this magazine, they were quoting a sex therapist, and I was like, oh, that is a career. You can do that for a living and get paid to do that. And at that point, I had never had sex. I was really afraid of relationships. I would end them after 2 weeks. I would just be like full primal panic, go cold, and just be like, I'm done. And that was a repeating pattern. And I also had I had sexual trauma from when I was younger, eating disorders, like a whole lot of protective mechanisms to prevent pain and fear, but not even realizing that it was perpetuating it. So I went into the field to really heal myself. I liken it to the archetype of the wounded healer who finds, goes on this hero's journey to heal themselves, and then on the other side can be open to healing and helping and supporting everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So went to grad school, studied marriage and family therapy, studied sex therapy, dove into metaphysics, energetics, Reiki, yoga, and psychedelics. So it all just kind of when I was ready, the student was ready, the teacher came.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what comes up as you're sharing these variety of interests and disciplines that seem to intersect is that I feel like our culture has had such a materialistic view of sexuality, and now we're starting to come into this kind of understanding of it as an energetic process or even a healing modality. And I wonder if you can kind of talk about maybe the differing perspectives. Now, I know everybody has a different perspective, but just kind of from a broad cultural sense, what are some of the different perspectives on those two ends of the spectrum that you see around sexuality? Does that make sense?
Mm,
Because like
possibly.
we have like this just the animalistic, you know, physical act of sex, and then
Hmm.
we have these energetic bodies that are drawn to each other, that are creating together, and I just wonder how much of our population even has a call it spiritual perspective about sexuality.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say it in that way. So when I'm working with clients or when I'm doing my ketamine assisted therapy retreats for women around sensuality, I bring in this model of the medicine wheel. And the medicine wheel, in this model that was inspired by Gina Ogden, it incorporates the four quadrants of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And so I like to break down sexuality in these four quadrants. We can have the mental story around what does sexuality mean for us? What does sex mean? And this can incorporate all the stories that we've had of our life experiences. We all have a different definition of what sex is. Many of us ascribe to the socially constructed idea of what sex is, which is penetration, orgasm focused, tends to be cisgender, heterosexual, um, tends to be partner focused, focused on the other person. How can I get them off? Production focused, and very quick. And then we can look at the emotional side of that, and sexuality can be for the experience of emotional connection, as well as all the emotional stories that we have. Some of these past experiences of trauma or um, uh, connection with times of rejection or times in which we, I guess, emotions of having an orgasm and going into full crygasm, or a release of emotions because we release the pent up tension or clenching of our body, which can lead us to the physical side of it. Is this, how do we relate with this physically? Is this more of the physical body, or is this a practice of play, or is this a sensual experience, where we're inviting the pleasure of our senses through our body? Or is this a kinky practice where we get to play with roles and bondage and restriction, or um, the subtle energy bodies, as you spoke to, like realizing that our bodies can feel intensity through the subtleties and the buzz of the body and the exchange of energy. And then the spiritual side of it, what is the spiritual meaning we have around this? Spiritual meaning, the questions that we have beyond ourself, or the relationship that we have with ourselves as divine beings. And so I like to really weave all of these to see sexuality as this holistic perspective,
Mm.
that it is more than just the physical act if you want it to be. And you can see how these interrelate with one another. And in from that perspective, we can really change how we relate with our bodies, relate with each other, relate with sexuality as a life force energy that moves us and pulsates through the world, and how
Mm-hmm.
we show up in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, can it ever just truly ever just be a physical experience, or all those other components always there if we're not conscious of it?
That's the key, what you just said there at the end, if we're not conscious of it. Because sure, it can be a physical act if that is our the narrowed limit of our conscious awareness. I think of the concept of the spotlight and the floodlight as it relates to psychedelics. The spotlight is the narrow focus on what we understand of something. This is the shallow concept of a behavior or a thought or a feeling. But then when we turn on the floodlight, we realize that it isn't just existing in a silo. It interrelates with everything that I just said and with each other. So we can't just have a single influence without it having influence on another, but we have to have that conscious awareness.
Well, I mean, you're describing sex like a psychedelic experience to me.
100%. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't see a whole lot of difference other than the physical component where for me, we run a psilocybin church, right? So psilocybin is treated like a sacrament, and in sexuality, I see perhaps the other person or maybe the act itself as this concept of a sacrament, and both of those intersect with all of those parts of the human. Now, what you said about how did you say it? Something like how our sex life kind of shows up in the rest of our lives is something that I very few people do I ever hear talk about that. I grew up in a Catholic family community, still in the Southwest here, or Southeast, Mideast Kentucky. A lot of shame-based conversations, if any, happen around sex, and for people to even conceive of their bedroom life expanding out into their work life or their friendships, I think is a foreign concept to a lot of people. So I wonder if you could kind of talk about that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I'm from Missouri too.
Oh, all right. All right.
I think I understand. I grew up Catholic, and that's a whole other story too. But it is something that the culture likes to do, as in segment our sexuality away from these other aspects of ourselves. But the reality is that we can't separate our sexuality from who we are. We are sexual beings. It is in the way that we reproduce. It just is there. And so it's funny how we create these constructs to compartmentalize and separate. But even if I go to a church function, I am still a sexual being. It is how I relate with my body. It is how I relate with the way that I move through time and space. And sexuality is and I'm going to use this term again, I'll explain what I'm talking about, the life force energy. It is our nervous system energy. It is the interrelationship between the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system as it turns us on and relaxes, like these two that interplay. And so our aliveness, is how we interact, how we open, how we expand, how we have a relationship with everything, with our pleasure. And pleasure is like, or I think of, let me back that up. Sensuality is our relationship to pleasure through the senses, which is through the body. So like, technically we could be making love to everything all the time if we allow ourselves to be open and recognize these things. Like I'm walking barefoot on the ground and I'm like, I feel my whole body turned on, not because I'm like fucking the earth, but because I'm letting it, like, the pleasure of it be arousing to me,
Yes.
And so, like, it's just funny how we narrow these definitions and we create this fixed functioning definition of what arousal is, or turn on, or sexuality, and I just it can inhibit our liveliness, our turn on. There's another word that Carl Jung uses, and it's eros, and eros is aliveness. Eroticism is aliveness. It is like our relationship to these things. And so I just don't see them as separate.
Is that an actual, like, definition that eros and eroticism are, or are you just kind of metaphorically connecting them?
I'm metaphorically connecting them, but if you do go back to like Freud and Carl Jung, they're looking at, you know, the concept of eros is to be alive. It's
Mm.
not to be dead. It's the opposite of dying or pursuing death.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. No, the avocado, the salted avocado I just ate a minute ago was very sensual. You know, and I think this a lot when we were having a conversation the other day is the pine trees were blowing pollen all around, and we were talking about, I don't know how we got talking about sexuality. And it's like, yo, it's like everything's fucking, everything around
Oh
us
yeah.
is just, it's just the product of sex. And we shame that. I mean, do you feel like the majority of this kind of compartmentalization is due to religious upbringings, or is it, yeah, where do you attribute that, if anywhere?
Yeah. Yeah, power. It is the pursuit to hold some sort of power over another person. So I think
Ah,
religion, you know, some religions, because I don't want to uh, I don't want to shame religion because religion isn't necessarily the issue. It is the individuals within these bigger constructs that have created these rules for power to disempower certain people while elevating and protecting others. And so that's the issue. It's not religion itself. So we can look at those situations across centuries in politics, and even today in politics, or in religions, or just anywhere we see a gathering of people where one tries to create separation or disempowerment. So some of these rules around sexuality are designed to disempower people. And then the moment that we awaken to our sexuality, we get more energy. Our nervous system heals. We have access to more of our authentic expression. We're not being run by the rules that inhibit us, and that's a powerful being. You know, a person who is connected to their sexuality is a very powerful human. So of course, if there's fear in a culture, there is going to be these constructs to shame, to inhibit, to push down, to limit, and that leads to you know contractions in the body, rigidity in the body, a suppression of our expression. Um, yeah.
hmm. Wow. It has me thinking about people who have known, you know, and again, this is not to shame anybody. I don't want anybody feeling guilty about the way that they engage with the world, but when I encounter someone who considers themselves asexual, I have to wonder how much of that is some internal disempowerment. And do you have any kind of thoughts on, is there a kind of a, I don't know if it's a genetic or like asexuality,
Mhm.
is that it gotta, I'm like again,
That's okay. I'll take you from there.
yeah, go please. I'm gonna fuck it up, please.
I got you. Yeah. Yeah. So our sexual desire and our libido is so we oftentimes think that it's spontaneous, that it's like a light switch, you can turn it on and off. But in reality, there's a lot more contextual influence on it. So context based on our environment, or based on ourself, or based on our circumstance, based on our nervous system health or our hormone health, as well as our relationship with our partner or people outside of us. Now, that context, that list of context, is huge. It even includes some of the social pressures or the life experiences that we've been in, or the shames, or it's really endless, or even the temperature of the room. Like, all of these can have a relationship with us and and impact our libido or desire for sex. Now, we have created a lot of labels for people to be able to help them to self-identify where they are at in their experience of desiring sex, or their experience of being turned on for sex. asexuality is one of those labels that people can take on if they don't desire sex, the act of sex. That for any of these reasons of context or an embodied experience of aversion or avoidance or whatever it is. So we can look at that as it doesn't have to be, it can be a fixed identity, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be a state that somebody is in at that present moment where they might want sensuality, connection to pleasure and cuddling or affection, but they're not interested in the act of sex. And I'm going to leave that up for them to define of how they define sex, because everybody is also very different. So it is just a tool for somebody to be able to use for themselves to feel valid in what it is that they want. Because in our culture, I think a lot of people will look at somebody as who doesn't want sex, but they want affection and they want relationships and they want love, as something's wrong with you, or you have something to fix, or go see a therapist because there must be trauma or something. And that disempowers a person from their desire, from their consent of maybe right now I just don't want it for this, that, or the other reason. And can that be okay? And now then they get into the question of, is this, if they're partnered, is that also in their partner's agreement? Because sometimes our partners say, you know what, that's not okay for me. I actually do want sex in a marriage or a relationship. And so at that point, we're no longer a fit. Or the person can say, okay, is there something we can negotiate around with your identifying as asexuality so that I can get my needs met too? And so it just gives us a term that we can actually do a lot with. And so I get people who come into my office who, when I now wants to identify as asexuality because they haven't had a term to be able to connect with for a really long time, and now they feel like, oh, I feel valid in this because there's other people that are feeling the same way. I don't have to force myself into doing consenting to unwanted sex. But now my partner, now we have something that we need to work through. And so then they come to me and then we can work through that.
Yeah. God, I can't help but be curious about some of the transformations you've seen. I would think, like, what's kind of, if someone is desiring to wake up their sensuality, what are maybe some kind of general recommendations or practices that you might share with people so that they can kind of ease into that on their own?
Yeah. So I made a whole course. It's a 14-day course. It's all about the foundations of sensuality. And it's called Sensual Awakening. And it talks about both the importance of developing a relationship with your nervous system and befriending your body, and creating a lifestyle of pleasure and desire, because our culture is more pain focused and more punishment ethos of like, let's avoid and let's make decisions based out of avoiding pain and punishment, and we don't make as many decisions based on just because it feels good. And so what we do know is when we start incorporating more awareness and pleasure, or tuning into the things like the birds that are singing outside my window and really savoring that for a moment, it actually increases your health of your nervous system. So it supports the healthy vagus nerve system, which is your resting system. And we can end up, as we strengthen that, we can hold more stress without going into dysregulation. So there's a term that is really popular right now called the soft girl era. And I think really we can apply this to everyone. But it is the concept of getting rid of not subscribing to the boss girl or the overly productive, like trying to build a multi-million-dollar course, and just being with the enjoyment of relaxation, setting boundaries, hanging out with community, being with your friends. And again, this is beyond a gender identity of just a girl, but this letting it be more than okay, but as a goal to be in joy, in pleasure, and hanging out, the more subtle, softer, relaxing aspects of life, rather than just having career be the leading the leading goal and purpose in our life. Can we just really enjoy it? So these practices, like I have a practice I do myself. It's called Sensual Sundays, and I've turned my Sundays into just that, enjoying Sunday, lazy mornings, staying in bed longer, cuddling with my partner, with my friends, like getting out music and making music and painting and just doing things that are fucking fun and just quieter and not being so intense and hard focus on production all the time.
Hell yes.
Hmm.
I just realized I have in the last 6 months stepped into my soft girl era. It seems like.
You know what? I think a lot of people are. I'm seeing it as a trend across the board, where people are tired of exhausting themselves, being on the exhaustion train.
The grind, like what the
Yeah.
fuck? What's grinding? You are grinding. You're
Yeah.
up to a pulp.
Yeah, the only type of grinding I want to do is on my partner. That's it.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. What about those with kids? Like, how do you, because, I've got 4 kids. It's difficult. Like, what do you suggest to people with kids and kind of being able to tap into that softness when there's so much responsibility around? I mean, MDMA works great for me. I'll suggest that.
Yeah, I mean, so can microdosing. So microdosing psilocybin. There's a trend going on with microdosing moms who are using psilocybin as a way to be able to soothe and relax their nervous system so that they can be more present with their kids, so that the threshold of what they can tolerate is bigger and they're not collapsing as much. But also, same with ketamine too. So microdosing of ketamine can also be a really powerful way to access softness, to access the reference point of everything's going to be okay. I do use ketamine in all of my retreats, in my my sensuality retreats, because of that. And the biggest thing when I'm working with parents with kids is that their nervous systems tend to be so dysregulated with the kids because the kids are loud, they're running around, the kids need things. And teaching or even teens, teens coming in who are like,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
yeah. And if the parents can learn to self-regulate, if they can slow their breath down, if they can slow the pace of their voice and soften their voice with presence and attunement to their teen or their kid, it's interesting to see how the kid's nervous system will co-regulate with their parents. Creating an environment of softness, play music in the background that has a slower pace, that has binaural beats, something that makes the environment quieter, will also co-regulate for the kids. So things like that, or bringing out the paints and bringing out art, or taking the kids into nature so that you're also entering into something that's softer for yourself and for the kids. These, think of sensory things that can support you and them, as well as self-regulating. I find those to be the most helpful, because it's easy to get us like on the frequency of their dysregulation, and that just isn't going to help anybody.
My wife Courtney and I were having this exact conversation last night. We spent 5 or 7 days up in Maine taking mushrooms and taking MDMA, no kids, fucking like bunnies. It was amazing. And then
Love
we
it.
come back, and then the kids are like, I want milk, I want this. And we're like, oh my God. And you just feel yourself closing down. It's like, oh no. I don't want, I want to keep myself open, and so we got into some practices last night of deep breathing together. We watched some comedy, anything that can, and I haven't really made that conscious connection between the the CNS and arousal. I mean, it's obvious now that you say it, and it
Mm-hmm.
makes total sense why, particularly for me, LSD and psilocybin, like the day after or for weeks after taking LSD or psilocybin, I am so turned on for life, not just for sex, but for
Yeah.
life. And I mean, LSD in particular has been, I feel like my vagus nerve, I feel like I can feel it just like, just relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, it's just powerful on many levels there. What are
Yeah.
some of the other kind of intersex overlaps, confluences between psychedelics and sex that you might share?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as we compare the two of them, like you said earlier, tying it back to what you said about sex is very psychedelic. If we bring our conscious awareness into sex, like if you are engaging in an act of sex with your partner, whether that's rolling around or penetration or whatever that is, and you are tuning into, you have internal awareness, intrinsic awareness, and extrinsic awareness, meaning you're attuning to your partner and to yourself, you will
Mm,
notice subtle contractions in your body. You will notice thoughts arise. You will notice freezing or a dip in your desire or an expansion of it. And in each of these, there's information. If you get distracted, that's information. If you can bring your awareness there and you can say it out loud, or if you see your partner, get distracted, or you see uh, their body stop writhing, or their breathing changes, like that is information. And when we can
mm,
speak to it, we can bring our attention to it, see what's there.
mm,
This is somatic therapy straight up.
mm,
And
mm,
this is what I teach in all my clients in the psychedelic work that I do, is like bring it into that feeling, bring it into the thought, bring it into the thing, and what's there. So maybe the shutdown, there's a unprocessed trauma. Or if you get distracted, maybe that is a protector part that is preventing for deeper intimacy. Or maybe we feel insecure about that, or we're worried about our partner being enjoying us, or that we're worried that we're taking too long to orgasm when they're going down on us, or something like that.
mm.
Like all of this shows up in the body or in the mind. And so as sex as a psychedelic, you can expand on that, you can heal on that. Like the number of times I brought awareness to something, where I was starting to dissociate, and then my partner brought awareness to it, I started bawling
Mm.
because I realized there was a vulnerability that was being protected by the dissociation. So, think of it like that. You don't have to have a psychedelic, but adding a psychedelic can also help us to access these new reference points. Many of us struggle with uh, you know, social anxiety, or um, difficult time with body image. You know, it's going to say punishment. I don't know, but yeah, punishing ourselves with body image negativity. Or some of us are clenching in the body, so we have a difficult time with relaxing. Painful sex, vaginismus, dyspareunia, painful penetration can be, or a block in penetration. And the use of psilocybin can be really powerful, or microdosing of psilocybin can be really powerful to help relax the body and open the body.
Mm.
So there's these tools that can give us the references, increase the energy, or help us to connect with our partner, or help us to fall into sex as following the guidance of pleasure rather than goal. And then if you want that to change your sex life, integrate it. So after the experience with the sex and psychedelics, like write it in your journal, process with your partner, take the points that you learned in that, and then implement them in your everyday sex life. Otherwise, it can be a really fun, sexy fuck, but then if you take that and treat it like a ceremony, treat it
Mm.
like you just did as yeah, psychedelic um, session, it can become a lasting integration of your of your sex life.
Mm. So I'm hearing intention, awareness, integration, concepts
Hmm.
that are transferable between sex
Yes.
and
Hmm.
psychedelics. I
Yeah.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. The expanded awareness, in particularly, is what one of the kind of aspects that I have found most interesting. And I don't know what you know about kind of like Mesoamerican shamanism. You know, I've been doing psilocybin work pretty intensely for about 25 years now, and I've studied quite a bit of shamanism. And you know, I years ago I heard this prescription that the shamans would give the curanderos and curanderas to not have sex for 3 days before a ceremony or 3 days after. And I originally interpreted that as some kind of a moral prescription, right? And then as I started to understand practicing qigong and you know, cultivating qi,
Mm-hmm.
began to understand that, oh no, this is an effort to preserve energy to apply into the psychedelic space. And so that gave me a whole different concept of like energy as a tangible kind of I want to say appendage. That's how I experience it more so these days, as like an actual part of our being that we can work with, that we can use to, you know, improve the quality of our lives and that of others, just through, you know, being present and increasing awareness. And have you ever heard, or do you have any thoughts on that kind of concept of sex, no sex before or after psychedelics in that traditional sense?
Yeah, I have. And so what you're speaking to is again like nervous system health. You know, if we abstain from that, we can really benefit from, you know, the nuances of the what the psychedelics can help with our nervous system. You know, and so like how can we um, keep that I don't want to use, I do want to use the word pure, but I don't want to use the word pure. Um, Without an introduction of something else that would impact, you know, impact that. Um, I also think that sexuality can sometimes, you know, with it has a lot of emotions, a lot of, I mean, there's just a lot attached to sexuality. You know, are we having sex with another person? What's the relationship like with that person? Is that going to distort our clarity of thinking and discernment? How is that going to enter into our ceremonial experience? So yeah, and then even just taking that time after the experience of being with yourself and being in meditation and not again not being not having the I don't distraction or not having the introduction of another person's energy
Mhm.
or presence or you know relationship with another person until you know we can have that time to just let the information settle, let our body settle, just being with that. Those are the initial things that come to my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I've never talked with any kind of sex professional about that concept. I think that you are the first sex therapist that I've spoken with that is, you know, heavily involved with psychedelics. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, just being curious of your perspective
Yeah.
around.
Now, yeah, now I will say that because I've also been looking at different cultures around the world, even through ancient times, and there are different cultures that use the sexuality with the psychedelics. So we've seen some of this in ancient Samaria. We've seen this in some cultures in Greece.
Hmm.
The Aztecs also had rituals with sex and psychedelics. With
Really?
yes, hmm
Can you talk more directly about that? I've never heard of this.
yeah, yeah. There are a couple of gods, one god and then one goddess who were associated with psychedelics. The god, and I'm not going to remember his name, so I'm going to encourage everybody to do that research too. Um, but he was the god of plants, including plant medicines and ecstasy and sexuality and playfulness and fun. And then the goddess was with fertility and uh, with not even just psilocybin. There's also some other psychedelic plants as well, like morning glory is one of
Hmm.
them as well. So with those, it was a lot of like with the Aztecs, it was with prostitution and with psychedelic plant medicines and um, yeah, just rituals of ecstasy. And we actually see that in other cultures as well. So in ancient Greece, there was also the practices with the Eleusinian mysteries, but also some of the practices with where women would go up into the mountains and practice ecstasy practices and full feral, like wild, ecstatic dances and things like that with psychedelics.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
What
Um,
about the Sumerian? I'm particularly interested in the Sumerian. What you know about
mhm.
that?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to think of the researcher, John Marco Allegra does a
Hmm.
lot of work with the sacred mushroom and looking at some of these ancient cultures and fertility practices. So most of them were around fertility cults or women using the psychedelics and then being whether it was engaging with the earth to increase fertility of the earth or engaging with men as a way to um, yeah, most of the time increase fertility of the crops, as them representing um, uh, the relationship with fertility of the earth with with nature.
Hmm. 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 Can you talk more about? Um, I mean, you spoke of it as prostitutes. I mean, this is getting into area that I'm even a little uncomfortable talking about. So I definitely want to go there. But this idea of the sacred slut or the sacred prostitutes is something that is completely out of our framework. Like, how do we understand that?
Oh man, this is a whole rabbit hole. Let me see which layer I want to start with here. um, so to speak to the concept of archetypes first, an archetype is a symbol that embodies the characteristics or qualities of um, of of something that we all agree to it embodies. A symbol can be, or an archetype can be an object. It can be a place. It can be a symbol, or I'm sorry, a symbol, a like written drawing or a sigil,
Mhm.
or it can be a person. And so in each of these, it holds a specific meaning or it holds a specific narrative or story that we associate with it. And the more that it's used, the more that we agree upon it, the more that it has that power. A stop sign is a good example. We agree, and so that stop sign has a lot of power to mean stop. So archetype, as in a person, is um, it's the personification of these specific qualities. A prostitute is a good example of an archetype. We look to that personified example and we associate these particular meanings to it. Now, each of these archetypes have symbols of that are in the light and symbols that are in the shadow. So the light attribute of the prostitute is someone who who is resourceful, someone who uses what they have in order to get what they need. They can, whether it's their bodies, or it's we all do this every single day. Like, what are we needing, and what are we giving in order to get that need met? Um, it can also be in terms of some of these prostitutes who served in temples. They are serving as a proxy to the goddess, or they are serving um, uh, as a conduit for the goddess, or a priestess in worship to the goddess, which priestess is another archetype too. But in regards to, I think in this regards, we're talking about sexuality. You know, they're using their sexuality as something that is a way to connect to the goddess, or have worship through the goddess, or to do work around the fertility of the lands through this particular person. The shadow side of this same archetype can be someone who gives up their power to in order to get something. So let me give you my power in exchange for safety, or give you my power for exchange of money. There is just a difference of the intention and energetics behind these actions. So it might look the same as I'm giving sex for money, but the energy behind it, the person who is embodying the archetype, may be different. And the more we can bring our conscious awareness to these things, then we can empower our own selves to know where we're at or what we're doing with our bodies, or with our sexuality, and make a decision from power.
Is this an archetype that we're completely missing in our culture? And if so,
Yeah, I mean, we're doing it consciously or unconsciously, truthfully. Like we all have, and that's the other thing about archetypes. We all have these archetypes within us. They might lie dormant, or they might lie unconscious to us. But we can play with these archetypes as a way to consciously embody some of these qualities that we would like to. You know, the concept of the queen is a good example of, you know, the light attribute is someone who is benevolent and who rules over and takes care of her people. The shadow side of it is someone who is punishing and power hungry, and wants to, you know, keep her people at a distance. So again, bringing this into awareness, if I want to embody a queen, am I punishing men? Am I punishing other women? Am I taking advantage of power? Or am I being somebody who owns her power and is kind and loving and supportive and nurturing, and looks to the benefit of all, looks for a win-win, and I won't diminish myself in order to or manipulate in order to be in power. So the prostitute, yeah, what are we selling? What are we giving in exchange for somebody else? Like we can do this. I see this happen all the time. You know, people will be out of integrity in order to be to be seen on social media. You know, I will do these things, but behind the scenes, that's not who I am. Or I will sell myself out and do these, you know, in order to get money, I will sell these products that I don't agree with, or that are not eco-friendly, and that's against my value, but I'm going to do it because it gets me ahead in the game, or because it gets me money, or it gets me fame, or something else. You know, it gets another need met, but it's not from my power.
it has, when you say, you know, social media, it has me thinking about, you know, the Instagram models, and, you know, my kind of relationship with that, it has been kind of a back and forth. Like I've had stints where I'm like, you know, following a bunch of hot Instagram models or whatever, and, you know, I love the female form. And then I'll be like, oh, this is just like, I can't support someone that is just like, this is how they are, like, expressing their values through the world. And I feel like, not shameful or guilty, but I feel like I'm contributing to someone's kind of demise in a way, and then we'll kind of pull back. And I guess like then it brings up the thoughts around pornography. I mean, how do you see that kind of spectrum of representation and public engagement through sexuality? How does that contribute, detract, or intersect with mental health, spiritual health?
Ooh, yeah. Okay, good question. And there is I have a lot to say on this. So there is, first of all, I love to hold the perspective of curiosity and compassion as we're looking at, and conscious awareness as we're looking at any of our behaviors or the behaviors of another person. You know, as I was describing the light attributes and the shadow attributes, I want to be careful that we don't label that as positive and negative, but more of conscious versus unconscious. And for someone who is using Instagram as a way to create security, financial security for themselves through sexy pictures, they can do that. That it may be coming from their power. It may be a conscious decision. It may also not be. There could be other parts of coercion or fear of the loss of being safe and or having security, financial security. So the spectrum of somebody doing these different activities is wide. Now, it can also be considered sex work. You know, pornography is a form of sex work. OnlyFans is a form of sex work. Instagram modeling can also be a form of sex work, whether they're conscious of it or not. There could be the intention of, using their looks and their body as a way to ignite eros or attraction, or everybody's different. Every single person is different. I also know I do know individuals who use their sexuality on Instagram as a way to, as a tool too. So with that said, it is their responsibility, if they want to become consciously aware of how it's impacting them. These choices are impacting them. Is it, how do they feel? What is the collateral that they have to pay in order to operate in that way? That's up to them. And they can choose to do that hero's journey or not, and that's totally fine by them. We also have responsibility for our own selves to recognize what it is, the collateral that we're paying to do that behavior. Does that feel good for us? Does it not? In what way are we being intentional around it, or not? And that's okay too. But it just is. How are we taking self-responsibility and self-leadership around this versus just putting it on the other people who are putting the material out there? Is it impacting our mental health? Very good question, Eric. How is it? For some of us, it's inspiration, to see a woman in her fullest sexual expression, their sensual expression. Me as a practitioner, I put out content that is both educational and on the sensual side. Like, you'll see me really expressed on there. I don't post any nudes. That's for my intentional limit. I also don't post, I don't post certain things, and I'm still an erotic expression of myself. And I find that is intentional as a way to inspire other people, to give reference points to other people, to invite other people into being their fully integrated professional self and sensual self and playful self and weirdo self. So yeah, I gave you a very multifaceted answer there that ends to no answer, but rather more questions.
That's how I like it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a kind of a convoluted, I don't want to say mess, but in ways, I mean, particularly pornography, and for me, like the what seems to be, I don't want to say it's inextricable, but like human trafficking is so wrapped up in pornography, that it is for, I mean, there have been times that I've engaged with pornography that I feel like my intention was to kind of have a deep appreciation for the female, for the goddess, but it just very quickly is like, what's going on behind the scenes here, right? And what's the intention behind the production of this? Because it's not just our intention. If it's an engagement of multiple parties, then everyone's intention is being brought into the conversation. So
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I just did a podcast episode on my podcast, Sex Love Psychedelics, with a sex worker advocate. And we got into this exact question. And she said, actually, there's more. There is a confusion between sex work and sex trafficking. And that there can be a lot of sex work that is empowering, that is, from the choice of the person. And sex trafficking is more of coercion. It's against somebody's desire, or they're forced into this type of work. And there's a lot around the force into that work, that I think things like, let me back that up a little bit. The porn that we might see online, there's also a spectrum. There is ethical porn, there's feminist porn, there is amateur porn that is created by, user created porn, and then there's also the coercive side of porn, that isn't ethical, but it's also not sex trafficking. So there's, to lay that out too. Some of the porn is more male oriented, and so you'll see everything is more body parts focused and geared towards an orgasm or a cream pie. And then you also have some, like with Erica Lust, that has real orgasms, that has build up, that has foreplay, and then you have people who do it themselves, that make their own porn and put it up there, and it's like real people and real experiences too. So it's like, yeah, can we bring more conscious awareness or intentionality behind what it is that we're consuming, just like we would with our food? Some of it can be harder to tell than others. I think the ones that are made by people by themselves are probably the most, I don't know, ethical.
Oh yeah, I think with that, I think about like dudes and revenge porn and posting
Oh yeah,
videos of the, it's like
yeah.
it just very quickly becomes muddy for me, and I'm like, I don't know, like I choose to not engage with it to a large
Hmm.
extent because of kind of the murkiness of it, and having a lot of my psychedelic experiences since around 2021 or so have become very focused on honoring the goddess, honoring the
Mm.
feminine, and so it's caused me a significant kind of shift in perspective. But it's just it's so fascinating to me that this conversation between our individual sexuality and also pornography in particular, they are so prevalent in society. I read a study said something like 90% of men have watched pornography within the last week, and 70% of women have watched pornography within the last 7 days, or something like that. And it's like, this is such a huge part of our culture, and it gets almost no sunlight. We just hardly ever talk about this. And the shame,
Mm.
like, that's one of my hopes in this chapter of the podcast, and covering, having so many conversations around sex, and it is to help the audience in even if it's just little ways, diffuse more and more of that shame.
Yeah, I think the word porn, though, like, and that's why I described so many different, like the spectrum of it, because porn has become demonized from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And, there has been research that's talked about how it impacts the brain and it impacts our
Mm-hmm.
sexuality. And yes, and there is
Mm-hmm.
also like erotic material that I think is really important to be able to use, to nurture our turn on.
Mm-hmm.
For many people, like I said, desire isn't a light switch. And
Mm-hmm.
so it can be a tool, but it just has to have conscious awareness around it. I watched Bridgerton the other day, and Bridgerton on Netflix has the fucking sexiest scenes on there. And it just is like, it's like soft girl porn, but in a period time, like Renaissance period times. And so it's also like, there is something powerful about watching people have sex. Some
Mm-hmm.
of these TV shows, Netflix is having way more shows that have sexy scenes in it. And that's a turn on and can be a tool. right? And so it just is. And then audio erotica like Dipsy, or I made a podcast called Erotically Wasted with that had erotic stories that I wrote and did audio around. So it's like, you know, use these tools and just have awareness around it.
Wow. So what about the shame issue? How do we help people kind of recover from so much of the shame that's been hovering around sexuality,
Yeah.
especially when we're not able to talk about it for the most part?
I think identifying what the narratives are, the narratives about ourselves that we have around them, figuring out where the roots of these are, following people. 'Cause here's where social media can be powerful. You know, it can connect us with reference points of other people in communities like ourselves. People who follow me on Instagram, my handle now is Dr. Kat Meyer.
Yeah, I saw
Used
you
to,
change that.
yeah,
Yeah.
used to be Sex Love Yoga, but I kept getting taken down too much. And censorship.
Yeah.
You know, people will tell me that they're inspired by the way that I incorporate kink and tantra and sacred sexuality and my academic background and you know my talk on psychedelics. And so they get these reference points of, oh, it's okay, it's more than okay, look at her, she's celebrating this and she's being that, and she don't give a fuck, or like, if you know, if she's met. And so those gives us these reference points, you know, follow those people or join communities that are sex positive or kink positive, and they're everywhere. Like we think, oh, I don't have a kink community in my area. You do.
Oh, yes,
You
you
just
do.
might have to go to, you know, the depths of Google, or you might need to go to FetLife, or you know, join online experiences and find where those are happening. So it's just, you know, having community, I think, is a healing part for so many of us. And it's the missing part, I believe, in the
Yes.
psychedelic world.
Yes.
Of like, you do a psychedelic experience and then you reemerge and you just did this and now you don't have anybody to connect to.
Yep.
That's what I do with all of my retreats. We create community so that you have people to talk with and explore with and connect with who've been in the same similar experience. So
Amazing.
and it helps us to have these, you know, be surrounded by reference points of something
Yes.
different.
Yes. No, we see it all the time within the sanctuary community, that people who come into sanctuary, or, you know, I ran retreats in Jamaica for several years, and people who come into this world brand new, and then they get immersed in a psychedelic community, and all of a sudden it's the most normal thing that they're taking psychedelics, you know, because you have that kind of external context around you to support you. And yeah, I feel like with sexuality, it's so important as well. I mean, my wife and I have been kind of publicly on this podcast and other places, we've talked about our polyamorous relationship, you know, for years, in the hope of helping people just kind of feel more comfortable talking. But in the same vein, we have experienced a fair amount of ostracization. I mean, my family completely cut me off because they heard me talking about our relationship. We were dating a woman for a year recently, and it was amazing. I mean, it did so much for our relationship, so much for my wife individually, and the woman that we dated, and you know, that anyone is going to impose guilt and shame around people living healthy, loving, honest. When we have divorce rates through the roof, so much, you know, people cheating on spouses, and I guess how would you talk about that? That's one of the, you know, the bigger subjects that I've worked with people around in their personal life is infidelity, and it's pretty rampant. I mean, I think it always has been. I don't think it's anything new to our culture, but how do you suggest couples like talk about things like infidelity, or one partner's pornography use, or those topics that one partner is very often keeping, you know, in a shame box all to themselves, and living a secret life that is it's tormenting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we could look at, I've helped so many couples with infidelity. There's many reasons why infidelity happens. It can be a symptom that something is wrong in the relationship. It can be that somebody met a part of themselves that was activated by another person, and they don't believe that that can be integrated back in the relationship. It can be like infidelity can be a wake up call. It can be a spiritual awakening where now we're having this come to Jesus moment where we're like, okay, we gotta we gotta look at this stuff that we've been either ignoring or downplaying or outsourcing, and how can we, what can we do to both rebuild the trust, heal this injury, and develop a deeper bond with each other and with our own selves. So again, like sometimes in when somebody cheats, they meet a more wild, adventurous part of them outside of the relationship, and they don't think that their partner can meet them there in this. And so then working with the couple of the person who cheated, how can they integrate that and keep nurturing this adventure part inside themselves in this relationship, and then also work with the partner who might have parts of them that are fearful or resistant or activates their wounds of not enoughness, and all of that can actually be worked with. So that can be healed, that can be tended to and cultivated. And so whether it's with a psychedelic experience or therapy, and the conjunction of both of those is beautiful, but you got to have the therapy around it. You can't just like have a psychedelic experience and then expect it to be done. Like that shit's got to be integrated too, because we can't just override the injury. It's got to be tended to and cared for and nurtured too.
Well, and I have to now use this as a bridge to what you already brought up, but kink and BDSM and those practices being therapeutic, being a way to kind of expand and integrate some of that other self into your life. And this is something that has been pretty new to me, right? And just even conceptualizing this as a healthy part of someone's sex life. And I wonder if you could kind of talk about that to help the audience understand how something like, I mean, BDSM, I feel like is one of the most taboo sexual topics that you can bring up. But when you really explore the culture, the consciousness around consent, around mutuality, communication is so powerful. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. We have years of we have so many years of the conditioning that if you are interested into kink, so you're fucked up. Something's wrong with you. You had trauma. You're weird. You're deviant. Something's wrong. And there is a lot of elements of kink that many of us have an attraction to. But because we of these cultural conditioning, we suppress, we cut off from it. We hide it in our shadows. We exile it from ourselves. And, if we take the term BDSM and set it aside and we look at the practices instead, being bound, tying somebody up, there is a sensual aspect to the rope. A practitioner is holding the person with their presence, with their grounded awareness, with their calm nervous system, the holding of the person and their encouragement. The holding of the person can be enough to energetically help the person to surrender and let go. And so many of us crave to be able to let go and surrender, but we can't, because there's fear or there's mistrust or there's or there's insecurity or there's something inside of us that's not allowing us to. And so that in and of itself can be powerful. And then you add the rope in there, and the way that you move the rope across the person's body, the sound of the rope as it hits the ground, put a blindfold on the person and their senses heighten. There's an excitement there. There is a sensation. when the rope is released from the person, there is a release and oftentimes an orgasmic feeling that can overwhelm that can go through the body. And all of that was done with subtlety, and just movement and holding and manipulating the body positions, or suspending the body in the air, like being suspended in the air, and then your clitoris played with, like that's incredible. Like I wish that on whoever wants that. And then there's a lot of energetic play that I do with people that I'm doing a scene for, or partners. I can place them up against the wall and put their hands on there and give commands. And that's another way of getting somebody to surrender into you, especially if they trust you. I'm saying, get down on your knees, look at me, don't say a word. These short commands with directness and attention and focus can get somebody to be able to let go, to just focus on their own experience. They don't get distracted or have to worry about everything else that's going on in life, or they can embody a whole new persona. Role play is really powerful here. We can move energy with impact. An impact of a flogger that has a thudding experience is like a meditation. It's like a massage meditation on your back. So the way that I move floggers with my hands drops into the rhythm of the music, and the way it's impacting the person gets them to just become heavy and relaxed in their body. And then you can add for people who like pain, you can add a stinging sensation, and all of a sudden they aren't thinking about anything else in the world, and they're so fixed in their meditation of the sensation and the buzz in their body, the endorphins in their body, the dopamine that's being released in their body, and the experience of deep devotion of being in a servant role or a submissive role, and like love, and just like the deep presence and focus of love between you and the other person, whether it's romantic or otherwise. So when we tune into that, like there can be tantric experiences, which is what I teach, is tantric BDSM, sacred sacredness. There's intentionality. We talk about the boundaries and the desires and the limits and the needs, transparency. There is sensation play. There is power play. And so framing it like that, we can see, there's a lot of attraction to that. We just may have never allowed ourselves to want that. Somebody smacking us on the ass is also a form of BDSM, but how many of us do that and then we renounce BDSM, saying that it's bad and wrong?
Right. Yeah. It actually can be a very therapeutic, helpful way to engage with ourselves. I mean, I personally love giving authority over to my wife. I'm just like, fucking please take the reins, I mean, it's wonderful to see her as she steps into her power, and then for me to like relinquish power. It's amazing. So I would love you kind of, we've talked a little bit, and I feel like it's been a little peripheral about sex as sacred. And I don't know if you'd like to speak directly to necessarily sex as being sacred, or ways that we can help bring our awareness to the sacredness of sexuality.
Yeah, I mean, sacred is is the way that we can relate to sexuality. It is adding intention. It is adding presence. It is creating meaning. It is the meaning that we place around it. It doesn't have to be sacred, but if we want it to be, we are giving it our conscious attention and presence and meaning to it. So how can we make it sacred? By really reflecting on how we want to show up in sex. How do we want to treat it? Who do we want to have with it? Like I said, creating intentionality around it. Understanding what are we, removing it from being a unconscious reaction and making it something that is, yeah, that is intentional. We're choosing this. We're going into this, even if it is for stress release.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I want to intentionally use this sexual act, whether with myself or another person or persons, with intentionality. We're gonna do some good stress release fucking, and that can be just as sacred. A quickie can be just as sacred. It just has that intentionality, and the intentionality of who with, who are we inviting into this space? Do I trust this person? Do I feel, is there good discernment? Am I enjoying this? Am I still enjoying this? Did I enjoy what I just did? So really checking in with ourselves. What makes a yes versus just consenting unconsciously? Is it a no, but I need something else in order for me to move towards a yes? So having those conversations. Some people like to add ritual to their sexuality to make it sacred. Ritual is placing meaning, it is using symbols, it is using repetition of an act in order to create power or initiate a coming into something. So a form of a ritual could be lighting candles or placing a squirt blanket on the bed, like a waterproof blanket on the bed, or it could be us coming together and sharing our desires, our needs, our fears, and having that exchange of vulnerability. It could be that we do a breathwork practice together, or we sit in each other's arms wrapped around, legs wrapped around, and breathe, synchronizing our breath, before we go into an experience. So those are just forms. There's many different types of rituals, but that can also bring a sense of meaning and intention to
So
what we're
again,
doing.
intention,
Yeah.
coming
Yeah,
back
yeah,
to intention. Yeah.
Yeah.
I listened to at this conference I was at. There was a wonderful conversation around consent, and I never really thought about kind of this spectrum of consent. And maybe as kind of the last thing we directly talk about here, can you just communicate with our audience a little bit around what consent means to you? How do you understand or engage and communicate consent?
Yeah. So consent is the embodied experience of a yes or a no. It is giving permission to access something of mine. So in order to have consent, we must have honesty and we must have agency. Agency is our ability to choose for our own selves. If either of those two are compromised, we cannot have consent. So that also means, with honesty, it's clarity of what it is that we're asking. So if we are clear with, and consent can be verbal, it can also be nonverbal. However, the nonverbal is a lot more difficult to get clarity. I've couples who one partner will think that they're non-verbally communicating consent by moving their hands down in a massage or beginning to touch inner thighs or outer thighs or breasts or something like that. And then the other person will clench. And so there's an non-verbal communication of guarding and wanting to prevent it from moving into something else. But because neither of these people are using their words, and it makes it much harder to be able to know what to do or how to move forward or what the limit is. And so it creates a lot of unsafety for both people, hesitancy in moving forward or knowing what to do and feeling rejected and guarding, to prevent and create safety within their own selves versus collaborating on the safety and talking about, this is what I would like to do for you. How would you like that? And you can make it sexy too. It doesn't have to be clinical. It can be, I want to put you up against the wall and I want to eat you out. How does that feel? Or tell me when to stop. Or this is, I want to do this with you. Is there something you want to add? And a negotiation is an agreement where both people can come to the middle. If I don't want to have penetrative sex and I just say, not tonight, honey, I'm tired. Well, that's a big shutdown. And perhaps there's something else in there that we can consent to. You know what? I'm not open to penetration, but I'm open to making out, or I'm open to, this other type of activity, or I'm open to it in an hour, but not right now. So giving alternatives and ways that we can find a win-win. Sometimes it is a no for whatever reason, and that's okay too. But if we just keep consistently saying that, it's not going to help us to be able to move forward and find that agreement, or nurture the erotic aspect of our sex life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that kind of moving in gradients,
Yeah.
right? Like that's since this workshop that I attended, that's something that I've been experimenting with in my relationship with Courtney, is like trying to really get granular on,
Yes.
like, what do you want? Okay, this now, you tell me when I want to do this, you tell me when it's okay, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it just creates such I feel like a more richness in the communication, where, like, as before, I think it's kind of a lot of male experience anyway, is like, I want to do this to the woman once she has given me permission, we're in bed or whatever, that I'm just going to do the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
But then it becomes a conversation, when you're like actually in process. How about this? Tell me when you want this, or tell me when you want to stop this. And
Yeah.
it just feels,
Which is hard for so many people, because women have been conditioned to put up with discomfort, to not ask for what they want, to not ask for what they desire, and to consent to sex even when they don't want to. And men haven't been given the skills of communicating or attuning to their partner, and they have sexual desires. And so I do see this often, where there is an unconscious coercion happening. And this isn't to blame guys. Again, I really fully honor the cultural conditioning, but there's coercion, whether they keep trying to take the partner's clothes off, or they keep pushing, or they keep asking, or they start pouting, or they get angry, and they're like, but I have needs, and then the woman doesn't know what to do. She either freezes, or she consents to it, or but then it creates aversion and avoidance, and more of a consistent no, because we just ended up creating this dynamic unconsciously, and now it's like we can't move forward. There's no flexibility. It's rigidity, and it's causing even further dysfunction, or loss of libido.
I'm so glad you brought that up. The male conditioning. It is probably about 4 years ago, finally was really woken up to it. And it's God, it's horrifying. It's so horrifyingly embarrassing to realize that you've been subjecting people to this kind of invasion of their space, of their sovereignty, without knowing it. Like,
Without knowing. Yeah.
And so, like, no shame to it, but oh my God, I feel like I know that in my relationship, waking up to the reality that I have been, the pouting thing is something fucking dudes are just like, it's just built into you. And it's like, God, yeah, of course it's a fucking turn off, right? Like, who wants to feel like they're, anyway, so it's just, I think that is such an important thing to bring up, and I'm so grateful that you did here. Got that in, because if there's one thing that I would love for my male counterparts to understand, and for me to continue to wake up to more and more, is that subtlety of consent. I mean, God, we lived in Jamaica, and it's like everywhere my wife went, she's just like, dudes are yelling at her, and that's really like what started to wake me up to what women are subjected to constantly, and it still happens. I mean, she went outside the skating rink the other night and just like couldn't even go to the car to get her freaking keys or something without 10 guys yelling at her. And then I have to, if I'm going to be a responsible, conscious man, I'm going to have to reevaluate all the things that I do in my process with her and other women. So anyway, it's a big subject. Well, all right, we're 90 minutes. This has flown by. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, last question for you. What's psilocybin say to you? Maybe it's something specific around sex, or maybe it's just nothing, or maybe you have nothing to say from psilocybin. I don't know. What's ketamine say?
Yeah, yeah. No, psilocybin speaks to me. Psilocybin tells me that I can self-source my own turn on, that I don't have to outsource it to anybody else, that it exists inside of me, and I can just use my own tools to activate
Yeah.
that.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Kat Meyer. It has been absolutely a pleasure. I look forward to following your work and continue keeping up with you. And everybody check out her podcast and her work on Instagram and all social media. And yeah, maybe we'll talk again.
Thanks, Eric.